we have to 3D model Dexter from Dexter's lab in the style of Fallout Vault Boy. What the hell? Okay, the wheel is spoken. All right, first things first, for a project like this, you gotta have some reference. So I got some pictures of Dexter and Vault Boy, and I threw them into Photoshop and just started sketching. And I am by no means a drawer. I don't draw very often, and you can't keep clothes in me, so I'm not a drawer on 2 counts. But here I just started very loosely sketching out the shapes that I wanted to sort of match Dexter to the Vault Boy thumbs up pose in the Vault Boy style before I started doing the actual line work. And overall, I'm pretty happy with how this came out for someone who doesn't draw very often. I think we did a pretty good job of matching Dexter from Dexter's lab to the Vault Boy style. It's by no means a masterpiece of a drawing here, but I think it ended up being a pretty good reference for the 3D model that we were about to do. So I took the reference into Blender. I like to keep it on an image panel to the left, usually when I'm working on this stuff. And I decided to just subdivision surface box model this. I know a lot of people really prefer sculpting everything and then retopologizing later, but for super stylized characters like this, I don't know what it is, but for me personally, I just really enjoy subdivision surface box modeling these. So for the body, I decided to do this in T-pose. For one, I didn't know if we were gonna rig this to pose it later, maybe just like a really super simple rig, but also it allowed us the benefit of working with the mirror modifier, so I didn't have to model both sides. I could just model one half of him and basically be done with the basics of it. Here, I went hunting for a recent build of Make Human because I was gonna do anything and everything within my power to not have to model hands. But as soon as I brought those into Blender, I kind of realized there was a gigantic style mismatch here. The Make Human hands were way too realistic, and Dexter also only has 3 fingers if you look at the reference. So I ended up having to completely model some new hands from scratch to match the style a little bit better. It's definitely tedious, but it's not too hard if you've done it a million times. Notice I flapped his arms down some there. That was just to make sure that the arm proportions were correct. For the head, I decided to use a cube with subdivision surface modifier here, but after we got it in the right general shape, I put it to the lowest amount of subdivisions and applied it just so we'd have enough geometry here to start making the loops in the face. Fortunately, I only had to do the mouth loops because Dexter's eyes, I lucked out here, are his glasses, so I didn't have to do any tedious eye loops or complete correct face topology or anything. You'll notice I like to push, pull, and move things around a lot just to continuously tweak to get things into the right shape. I didn't do anything fancy for the ears there, I just extruded them straight out, but yeah, I just pushed, pulled, moved things around, and then here for the lenses, I just used a plane, and I did go ahead and start adding color to some of these things just to make sure things were looking appropriate. I felt like knowing what the eyes looked like and having them not blend in would be useful. And for the eyes, I did just end up using some cylinders. Those would be really easy to animate if we ever wanted to. For the hair, you'll notice that the 2D drawing has these weird nonsensical squiggles. So I went online and found the Dexter Funko Pop, which thank goodness that exists, and used that as just baseline reference for modeling the hair. And I didn't end up adding the squiggles because I didn't feel like adding all that extra geometry and stuff, but it still worked as a pretty good baseline reference for the general direction to go with the hair. I just went with some really stylized blobby hair. For the eyebrows, I originally tried using a Bezier curve. If you've ever tried to taper one of those and have one point that's like thicker, it never looks right. So the rest of this, the teeth, the eyebrows, pretty much everything, I just did with a cube with subdivision surface modifier. The hands, I didn't want to circular eyes. I don't think that's a word. I didn't want to circularize each of the individual fingers, so I just added a circle and bridge to the loops after chopping his fingers off like a madman. And here's where we started finally posing everything, which means applying the mirror modifiers, which is always very scary to me, so I usually take the mirror modifier version and shove it into a nope collection that's hidden just as a backup option. Cool trick here is using the 3D cursor as your pivot point. You can sort of select the joint geometry that you want, snap the 3D cursor to it, and then rotate things around the 3D cursor. Really useful for posing if you don't have an armature, which At this point, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to rig it, and I was 100% sure I wasn't going to rig it. So here I just started moving things into the proper pose. And you'll notice I'm posing things to the camera specifically. This was supposed to be a one and done, just modeling it specifically straight for the camera. Things don't have to be perfect from any other angle as long as it looks right from the camera. And you'll notice that I just took his hand that was already posed and I duplicated that across since this was going behind his body anyway. I didn't really want to re-rotate those fingers on the other side. Here I'm just pushing, pulling, moving things around, added some basic materials, got a light into place just because I wanted to sort of get an idea of what this was going to look like as early as possible. And I did use a huge amount of subsurface scattering to make his face look all nice and smooth like. For the jacket, I just cut across that front seam and folded it over, which would be a pain to rig if we were rigging it to prevent the geometry intersections. And then for the buttons, I just used some basic oval spheres because it worked. It worked for the style I was going for. For the background, you'll notice I'm already getting lights in place and adding a rim light. I just want to get this in pose as fast as possible. But for the background, I originally just wanted to suggest generally some tiles below him and just have a solid colored background, but it just kind of looked like a big hashtag. So I ended up taking a picture from Dexter's lab and sort of building a background to match that in the messiest way possible. Would not recommend this unless you're in this very specific situation where you're just doing one still render, because I modeled the background to camera just using flat geometry, but I was extremely fortunate that the Dexter's lab background art honestly matches very closely to the Vault Boy animation background art in terms of style. So not too big of a style mismatch here. I was able to just take some planes, give them each their own materials, and model it to the camera. Notice I didn't do like any extra effort or work here to get things outside of the camera to move it around. This was supposed to be a one and done, maybe zoom in or zoom out a little bit, but overall just modeled the background to the camera. Here I went to Polyhaven, which is a fantastic website to find HDRs to light with. I was just looking for something that was a little bit blue to sort of match the coloring of the lab to fill in the shadows that weren't covered by the area lights that I was using. Found something pretty nice there. And you'll notice that I'm just constantly endlessly being a perfectionist and tweaking things to make the silhouette and the shapes look right from the perspective of the camera. If this was a rigged character we were doing, I would be doing this, going about this totally different, but I'm just trying to mold this and sculpt it and make it look as good as possible from the camera. And you'll notice that the camera is 9x16 instead of 16x9. That's because from the get-go, I was conceptualizing this challenge as a TikTok or a YouTube short, so I wanted the render to match that aspect ratio. Here, once we get past all of the tweaking and colors and whatnot, I wanted to be able to control a vignette, and I want it to get darker the further you went away from the camera on the background. But the problem was that all of the background pieces were their own individual materials. So I made a group that handled that. And for the vignette, I used screen coordinates for a spherical gradient. And to have it get darker as it went further away from the camera, just to sort of pop him out more, what I did there was I used a linear gradient and gave it object coordinates and plugged an empty into the object coordinates. So I could just move the empty around and scale it to sort of change how dramatically the darkening went off. Here, I'm just kind of grasping at straws on to figure out what else I can tweak since I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, but we're honestly just kind of wrapping up here and getting towards the end. If you enjoy this kind of content or enjoy time lapses or 3D challenges or game development or anything, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. I've got a whole lot more stuff coming, but overall, we're wrapping stuff up. It's basically done here. Now, after the stream, I did end up modifying the lighting and some of the materials a little bit. Like there was some weird discoloration on his lips, but overall we're wrapping up here, and I'm pretty happy with how this thing turned out for just 5 hours worth of work, which I know 5 hours sounds like a lot, but I'm pretty happy with how this came out for basically one stream while hanging out and talking to chat. Not too shabby at all.